thing isn't always the easiest of tasks. We've all experienced this. This is something which goes all the way back to St. Paul. St. Paul complained in the letter to the Romans that I do the evil I do not want to do, and I don't do the good I do want to do. So there is this constant conflict between what we know to be right and then what we actually end up doing. Like the intellect has it clear, perhaps. We know the commandments, but then just the actually carrying them out in life is more challenging. And this is something which, being Catholic doesn't exempt us from. We could have been born Catholic, we could have converted to be Catholics, we could be any kind of rank, if you will, or we could have any kind of level of faith, but that doesn't guarantee that we're going to be doing the right things. So one time a journalist asked St. John the 23rd, the Pope, how many people work in the Vatican? And the Holy Father responded, about half of them. They knew that they were supposed to work, but they probably weren't. They didn't have that discipline, perhaps we can say. And now during these times of quarantine, we might have experienced with much greater, we can say, regularity, our own incapacity to do the right thing. The capacity to be patient with those around us, for example. That's something which is a much greater struggle now. Maybe we see ourselves knowing we should be patient, but having trouble doing so. Now, what is the solution? The solution to all this is virtue. Virtue is going to change what we do. It's going to change how we do it. It's going to change why we do it. And it's also going to change who we are. Virtues shape us. Virtues change us. Virtues are fundamental. The kind of person we are will most often be determined by those virtues we possess or those vices we possess. So that's why this is something which is fundamental for us to talk about. Now, what are virtues then? What would be a virtue? A virtue, it's commonly said, correctly said, is a good habit. And this habit is not a kind of habit that we normally think of. Normally when we think of habits, we think of like drumming our fingers upon a table, or we think about, maybe picking our nose, bad habits, good habits, indifferent habits. We think about mindless stuff that we just do automatically, like reflexive. But that's not the kind of habit that a virtue is. Like when we say that a virtue is a good habit, we don't mean it's something mindless that happens to be good. Rather, a good habit, in the sense of virtue, is a disposition to act in a particular way. So we could have the habit of honesty that disposes us to regularly speak the truth. We could have the habit of generosity, meaning we are disposed to normally help other people. Or we could have the bad habit of procrastination. I know nobody here suffers from that, in the sense that we could put things off to the last minute. Now, that it disposes us to do something. And it's also going to change our emotional life. It's going to change the way we feel about things. If I have a virtue, if I have this good habit, doing the good is going to be agreeable. It's going to be pleasing. It's going to be comfortable. But if I don't have the habit, I might be capable of doing the good, but I won't like it. It'll be painful. It'll be something like that will be accomplished, but I'll be gritting my teeth the whole way through, just hanging on for dear life and like really complaining interiorly over the fact. And so virtue doesn't just guarantee the proper action. It also guarantees that I'm going to be content while I'm doing it. And it's also a stable part of our being. This is the third thing we're mentioning so far about habits. Habits are stable. They're not just flukes. They're not just things that happen out of the blue. So if I have the habit of honesty, it means I speak the truth on regularly, even if that has negative consequences. So virtues, when we talk about virtues, they contain all of that. They are these things that we do regularly. They are the things that help us to do what we do cheerfully, like in a good sense, with a good spirit. And they also dispose us to do particular things. So along with that, virtues are going to change who we are. So Aristotle said that habits are within us, like a second nature. So we have the nature of being rational animals. We're human beings, which means we're rational animals. But this habit is going to modify that pre-existing nature. It's going to make us different in a particular way. Like St. Augustine defined virtues. He said that virtue is that which makes a person and his acts good. So the virtue doesn't just modify our actions, doesn't just modify how we interact with people, doesn't just modify what we do, it also modifies our very being. Just think about the way we talk. Just think about the way that you might describe somebody else, right? Let's say you got somebody by the name of Jacob. Let's say Jacob has a habit of kindness. We don't often talk about him, and we don't often say he has the habit of kindness. We say he is kind. Or maybe somebody else like Liz. If Liz is always on time, we don't say she has this capacity of always showing up on time. We say she is punctual. And if she doesn't show up on time, we say that's not like Liz. Liz is somebody different than that. So you have this kind of discrepancy, or you have this distinction rather, between the action and who the person is. Like a bad person could do good things, and a good person could do bad things. But the good habits we have are going to be making us into different kinds of people. Because as one theologian put it, we are undetermined in life. We are not yet set in stone. So long as we are here on this earth, we are going to be changing ourselves. We are capable of greatness and we are capable of destruction. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that we shape ourselves by our free decisions. So for better or for worse, the decisions I make, the habits I form within myself, for better or for worse, are going to change me, are going to modify me. But most often, most immediately, the effect of habits or lack thereof can be seen by the way in which we do certain things. Now, we've already mentioned a few of them, but we're going to flesh them out. C.S. Lewis uses this example of playing tennis. He says you can differentiate between somebody who has somebody, you can differentiate between somebody who has virtues and somebody who does not have virtues by comparing them to somebody who is a good tennis player and a bad tennis player. So you've got these two people. They both play tennis. The good tennis player, he's reliably going to hit good shots. The poor tennis player is not. It could also happen that the good tennis player misses a shot. You know, that happens at times, and the bad tennis player could occasionally hit a shot. But usually it's not the case. It's better for us to be the skilled player. We want to be the skilled tennis player because we're going to be hitting the shots more reliably if we have that skill. So that's the first way that the virtue modifies our actions. It makes us reliable. We reliably do the good. We do the good action more frequently and consistently. We are capable of this because the habit has changed who we are. And this habit that makes us so reliable, that makes us always hit the good shots in life, that makes us always tell the truth, that makes us always self-controlled, that makes us always prudential or makes us make good decisions, these virtues are always with us, regardless of whether or not we're actually using them. So a mathematician, for example, she's a mathematician even in her sleep. You know, it's not as if you suddenly cease to be a mathematician when you fall asleep and then you wake up and you suddenly transform into a mathematician again. That intellectual habit of math stays with you. It's fixed, it's stable. The tennis player is a good tennis player even when he's not playing tennis. He maintains that hand-eye coordination, the fitness, and his muscular form. So regardless of when the need to perform good action arrives, we're capable of it. The virtue also disposes us to act well in the future, so that regardless of when we have to act, we're able to do so. The third thing is that it allows us to do the right thing, the virtue. It allows us to do the good acts spontaneously and automatically. So the skilled tennis player, he seems to hit effortlessly and respond automatically. It's almost beautiful to watch somebody who's competent in their sport do so. And then you record yourself playing that sport and it's like, oh my goodness, what in the world is happening? But that effortlessness and the spontaneity, they're the result of training. So the virtuous person can do the right thing without really even thinking about it, without even straining himself. But if you don't have the virtue, if you don't have the habit, it's hard to do the right thing. You might be capable of it, but unless it's easy for you, you can't say you yet have the habit or the virtue. So for example, if it's hard for you to say no to that second bowl of ice cream that you really don't need, that shows that you don't quite yet have that virtue of temperance. Or getting out of bed in the morning. This is one that is a favorite, especially during the summertime. I remember that before the seminary, that was always a great struggle for me. But then after 11 years of religious life, living in community with other guys, it ceased to be an issue. So initially it was a challenge, but it ceased to be difficult. The habit and the virtue were developed over time. But once it is developed, it becomes easy. The fourth thing is that when you have this virtue, that capacity spreads to other areas of your life. So for example, we know everybody we probably all know somebody who plays sports competitively, and he does so well. So in high school, for example, there'll be different players on the varsity team, and most of them are really good at other sports as well. Like, at least in my high school, if you played one varsity sport, you probably played another varsity sport as well. Or if you're in college and you look at the guys that play on the athletic programs in college, those are the best at the intramural programs because the skills they develop in one sport are going to transfer to another. And the same thing happens with virtue. If you are virtuous in one area of your life, you're going to also be more readily virtuous in another area of your life. They spread from one area to another. So if you are, let's say you have the virtue of temperance, right? So you're self-controlled, you're able to restrain your desire for these sensible goods like food, drink, sex. If you are regularly controlling yourself with regard to how much food you eat, and then you go to a party where there's alcohol available all over the place, and you could drink excessively, if you have this habit of controlling the amount of food that you eat, you're disciplined in that area, it's going to be easier for you to control the amount you drink in this other area of your life. So they carry over. We call this the unity of virtues in morality. St. Thomas Aquinas compared virtues to the fingers on your hand, where your fingers, as they're growing, they don't grow like, it's not as if you're a baby and your pinky first grows to full length, and then your ring finger, and then your middle finger, and then your index finger, and then finally the thumb comes. No. Your fingers all grow together. Not necessarily all the same length, at least they shouldn't. I hope they don't. But they grow at the same rate, we can say. And that's what happens with the virtues. When you're growing in one virtue, you're going to be growing in another virtue. And one final thing that virtues will do. So we've been talking here about the different things virtues will do for your actions, but I've personally found very attractive, we can say, or appealing, another aspect, another benefit that comes from being virtuous. It was really highlighted by this 20th century theologian by the name of Pincair's. He was a Frenchman, Servais Pincair's. He was probably the greatest Thomist moral theologian after the Second Vatican Council. And he highlighted the fact that when you have virtues, you're free. Virtues free us. And when we say freedom, we should probably get on the same page, because sometimes we have this erroneous notion of freedom where freedom means choosing between contraries. Like, I'm free if I can choose what I want. If I can live in the city or I can live in the suburbs, that means I'm free. Or I'm not free if I can't do what I want. So laws take away my freedom. Rules take away my freedom. But that's not the authentic sort of freedom. That's the freedom of election, or the freedom, as Pincair's put it, the freedom for indifference. It's like the most basic form of freedom. Now, freedom, the way that we understand it, doesn't just mean the freedom to choose between different things. Freedom means the power to choose what is best. So freedom in the sense of I have the power to be faithful to my spouse even when I'm tempted by somebody else. That's freedom because I'm not enslaved by my temptation. Or the freedom is the power to tell the truth, even if it's going to hurt me, even if it's going to have negative consequences. That's freedom. When we have the power to do what is best, what we know what is best, but we very often struggle to actually do so. And to like illustrate this point, there's this beautiful analogy that Pincares draws between learning virtues or developing virtues and a piano, learning to play a piano. Like when you're learning to play a piano, the process at first seems to restrict our freedom. You know, we have to go through these monotonous drills and you have to put your fingers exactly here on the keyboard, and you have to, you know, sacrifice other activities. You have to dedicate a large number of hours every day to learn the piano. So you got these constraints. You're restricted. You're forced to like do these things in order to learn how to play the piano. And so, yeah, we're making sacrifices. We're giving up one activity, for example, hanging out with our friends maybe, or playing games or whatever, in order to obtain this capacity of playing the piano. But little by little, that skill of playing the piano is obtained. We keep on practicing. We persevere at the act. And we're able to play basic pieces, then more complicated ones. Then we can begin improvising and making up our own music even. And on top of that, as we get better and better, it becomes a source of relaxation. It becomes a source of joy. And so when you learn how to play the piano, it might be at first taking away some options. It might sort of restrict your freedom, like what you can do. Like, okay, you have to put your fingers in this position. But then once you develop the skill, you are free to play that piano. And not everybody has that freedom. You know, anybody can walk up to a piano and bang on haphazardly on the keys. That's fine. You know, you can do that if you want. But that's just rudimentary. That's a savage kind of freedom. And like it cloaks the incapacity to play even the simplest of pieces. But when you have the art of playing the piano, you've got a new kind of freedom, and you can do whatever you want on that piano. That piano is yours. You are the master of it, and you can make it produce any kind of musical melody that you desire. And that was a freedom that was only acquired through discipline, through perseverance, and through even making some sacrifices along the way. But this is the freedom that the virtuous people enjoy. People with virtue are free in the truest sense of the word, because they can do what is right. They can do what they know they should at all times. They're not enslaved by their emotions, by their passions, by their desires, by the opinions of other people, by fear. Virtuous people are free. A person with virtue has the courage to say what is right, even if it makes him unpopular. A person with prudence knows what is right, even in those complicated situations. A person who is humble, he's not going to be dependent upon the praise and the opinion of others. Virtuous people are free. So let's look at an example between like let's like contrast two different people to sort of maybe sum up what we've been saying about virtue. You've got two people in a room. We're going to be using the virtue of chastity. You got two guys in a room. You've got Matt and you got Jim. Matt, he's accustomed to treating women with dignity. He's not prudish, but he doesn't see women as objects for his sexual pleasure. And you got Jim, on the other hand, who's lustful. He doesn't have the virtue of chastity. He doesn't know how to use his sexuality well. That's what chastity is. So he can behave in a friendly manner towards women, but because of repeated actions, he tends to see and to treat women as primarily sexual partners for his own enjoyment. And these men are going to be marked by their respective habits, even when they're hanging out in the same room. Remember, we said that virtues will change who you are, not just what you do. So we got these two guys. You got Matt and you got Jim. Matt, who's got the virtue of chastity, Jim, who is lustful. And then as they're hanging out together, suddenly a very attractive woman walks into the room. Jim, the guy with lust, he sees this woman immediately and instinctively as somebody who can satisfy him sexually. And he does so without even thinking. He's never seen this woman before. But the vice of lust, the vice is the opposite of virtue. The vice of lust inclines him, disposes him to see her in that way. Matt sees the same woman walk into the room and he sees that she's attractive, but he also sees her as somebody, a person of dignity, who is worthy of his attention and not simply there for his sexual satisfaction. And he doesn't have to think about it. It's not as if he has like this distorted mental process of using her, and then he has like this theological discourse on theology of the body going through his head, like, no, but John Paul II said that men and women were created equal, and like sexuality is for this purpose. And no, that doesn't happen. It's just spontaneously responding in a virtuous, chaste manner. So his habit of chastity, his repeated actions of treating women in a respectful manner, is affecting the way he sees and interacts with this woman in this particular situation. And so even though the both of them, they might chat with her friendly when she they might chat with her in a friendly manner when she sits down in the room, but they behind these similar actions, they have different meanings that are shaped by their underlying habits. Matt, the guy with chastity, he sees the woman as something more than just her sexuality. Jim, however, he shapes his conversation with her because of that way he perceives her. And even if he doesn't eventually hook up with her, that goal, that distorted perspective, that vice he has, shapes his interaction with her. So once again, the virtues don't just determine what we do. Neither one of those guys ended up being with that woman, but they determined how they interacted with her and why they were interacting with her. The goodness of a person, this is important, the goodness of a person isn't just determined by what we do. But in order to do something good, we have to do it for the right reason and in the right manner. We have to be good inside and outside. That's why in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ criticized the people that prayed, fasted, and gave alms. He said, woe to you who pray in this way, who fast in this way, who give alms in this way. Those are great things to do, but they were doing them for the wrong reason. So he said, woe to you. You've already received your reward. It's not enough to simply do the good. You have to do it for the right reason. But you won't do it for the right reason on a regular basis if you don't have the virtue. And in the Beatitudes, we see the same thing, where our Lord didn't say, blessed are you who do such and such a thing. He said, blessed are you, happy are you when you are this kind of person. Blessed are the meek, not the people who do meek things, but the meek, those who have like that virtue, we can say, that habit of meekness. So certain people will be blessed. Not merely the execution of the external actions isn't sufficient to make us happy. We have to have those underlying virtues as well. So the virtues, they change who we are. They free us to do the good, and they modify the way we act in other situations. They change how we act. So we're going to perform tasks reliably now. We're going to perform tasks easily now. We're going to perform tasks joyfully now. They change who we are, they change how we act, and they change why we do what we do. All of this happens by the development of virtues. So I hope by this point, at least, we want to have virtues. Like, we want to get some of these. Like, it sounds like something that is very important. At least it should sound like that. And in fact, it is. So how do we actually get virtues? The simple thing to remember here, the one phrase that you have to remember, is that virtues are built by repetition. Repetitive acts lead to virtues. They could lead to good virtues or to bad virtues. So if you repeatedly do the wrong thing, you're going to get bad habits, you're going to get vices. But if you repeatedly do the right thing, you're going to be developing good habits, virtues. Just remember the analogy of learning how to play the piano. You had to stick at it. You got to do it over and over again in order to get the habit. Or the habit of exercise, for example. Habit of exercise in order to be healthy. So at first, you're going to have to overcome a contrary habit of being lazy, staying at home, and watching TV all day. So you got to overcome that. And then you've got to go to the gym over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, ingraining it so that it becomes natural to you. And then the third stage is going to be where it becomes part of who you are, so that you then exercise effortlessly. It becomes pleasurable and effortless. And you feel even, it's like something's off if you don't do it. So the repetition of actions is fundamental. But we should also highlight, or at least point out, that doing the deed isn't enough to get the virtue. Like if somebody outside of me is forcing me to do the deed, I'm not going to become virtuous. If I'm going to actually get a virtue, it has to be an internal choice of mine. I have to elect this. I am going to the gym, not because mom told me to, not because if I don't do this, I'm not going to get the job. I'm not just going to study because I want to pass the grade, but I am going to choose to do this action. I'm free. I could not do it, or I could do it, and I'm going to do it. I know what I'm doing, and I elect it. That's fundamental. Because if we're simply forced by an external force to do it, we might do it, but we're not going to be developing internal virtues. It's not going to be modifying who we are. And so this development is something which is progressive. Yeah, I'm going to share a quick screen if it's still here. Okay. I don't see anything. Can you guys see something on your screen? Yes, Father
Yes.
Christopher can see something. Okay, somebody else can see something. Where? I can't see it though. There we go. Oh, there we go. So this is kind of like what you might be going through as you are developing your virtues. Aristotle pointed out that we develop virtues in 4 phases. Like you might start out with a vice. Like, for example, here we're looking at intemperance. You might start out with a vice of intemperance. And when you have this vice of intemperance, you're going to, with your intellect, judge incorrectly what you should do. Like, you're not going to even realize that this is an excessive amount of food, for example, or an excessive amount of sleep. You're going to judge wrongly. You're going to do the wrong thing as well. You're going to eat too much, or you're going to sleep too much. And you're going to desire wrongly. You're going to want to sleep too much. You're going to want to eat too much. So that's like maybe where we find ourselves in certain areas of our life. We're just like, everything is off. We're not thinking the right way, we're not doing the right way, and we're not wanting the right way. But then, you could also see yourself starting out here, or maybe with effort you get to this point where you become incontinent, where you know what is right and wrong. You know you really shouldn't have that 3rd bowl of ice cream during Lent, but you choose to eat it anyways. Like, you do the wrong thing, and you want to do the wrong thing. So that's like the 2nd level of incontinence. But then you've got this 3rd level, continence. And this is kind of like the big shift, where you cease to be incontinent and you become continent. And when you're a continent, you know what is right and wrong. So, okay, I know I shouldn't have 3 bowls of ice cream during Lent. I should not actually sleep in until 3 p.m. on Saturday, even if it is Saturday. But you are capable of doing the right thing. So you know what is right and you actually do it. You don't have that 3rd bowl of ice cream. You probably stop at the 1st bowl, actually. And you desire, but the problem here is still you desire the wrong thing. So you've got it intellectually down. You make the right choice. Your will has chosen to do the right thing. So you're not sinning, but you still want to do the wrong thing. And that's why we need virtue. Virtue is when you know what is right, you do what is right, and you desire what is right. That's what we ought to be aspiring for. Because nobody wants to go through life doing the right thing and hating it the whole time. That's the continent person. And that's unfortunately where many people find themselves. Like, they do the right thing, but they're not happy about it. But we never want to stay there. We never want to be stuck with that level. We want to know the right what is right, do what is right, and want to do what is right. And that's something which becomes possible when we have virtue. And it can't be taught in a classroom. We've got to go out and we've got to be virtuous. Not a lesson you learn, it's a way of life. So there's a concrete plan we could go through, but I think that I've been going on for long enough. So that could be something that could come up in the questions and answers, maybe, if that's of point of interest. I mean, at this point, we're going to be passing over into that questions and answers section. But one thing that, yeah, if we get to, I'll bring that up. So, you know, it's incredibly important that we develop these virtues. It's something fundamental. We need to build virtues. We cannot be satisfied with simply doing this thing right or that thing right. We have to build good habits that allow us to do the good easily, joyfully, and consistently. And let's remember, everybody's talking about freedom in our world. You know, everybody's fascinated with freedom. We just want to be free. And we've got that phrase in the United States of like, freedom is not free. And the same can be said about internal freedom. Our freedom to do what is right is not free. We have to pay for it with blood, sweat, and tears. Because growing in virtue isn't going to be easy. It's going to require hard work. But if we persevere at it, we can achieve that freedom for which that Christ came to give us, gave us. He told us, for the sake of freedom, I have come. Christ came to set us free from the power of Satan and also from our own vices and our own evil inclinations. So with Mary's help, that's something we hope to obtain. Now, at this point, let's see if, I believe that there's time for questions now. And I think that the idea is that you put them into the chat.
Exactly. So if you can put your question on the chat menu or chat bar there, Father Ted will see it. And we've already got one up for Maria Cecilia. Father, if you want to answer that.
Where is it? Is it better to focus on growing the virtues that may be? Okay, so Maria Cecilia said, is it better to focus on growing the virtues that may be easier for us to practice, since each virtue spreads to other virtues and areas in life? Or is it more productive to focus on growing in the virtues that we most struggle with? No, it's a good question. And I mean, it's a good argument for like why we might want to practice with some of those virtues that come to us more naturally. Usually, however, it is recommended that we attack at that weakest point. Like, let's say our greatest struggle is with being punctual. Like, we're always late to work, we're always late to class, we're always, you know, neglecting our responsibilities because of forgetfulness. So we're lacking some of that discipline. And that's the area that's like really affecting us negatively the most. That's where we should really attack, because when we are trying to develop a particular virtue and we see that this area of our life is most defective, there are probably many other areas of our life that are also defective on account of this one really, really bad area. So in the same way that the virtues all grow together, like the fingers on your hand, so too do the vices all grow together, like the fingers on your hand. And so whenever we overcome any particular vice, we're also going to be overcoming other vices that are connected. So you've got this, like, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You might be killing 5 birds with 1 stone. So as you develop, or as you overcome one bad vice, you're going to be actually overcoming various other vices. So the exact same thing you said here, where the virtues will spread to other areas of our life, precisely for that reason, you want to then, or rather that same reason applies to that really defective area of your life, where the virtue you develop to counteract that really bad part of your life is going to also spread to the other areas of your life which are struggling and in need of virtue more than other areas. So that's something which, yes, that would be like the usual course. But in order to keep yourself from being discouraged, you want to be realistic too. You don't want to say, okay, so for example, I'm sleeping in every single day until 2 p.m. All right, I'm going to start waking up at 5 a.m. Okay, that might not be the best way to start. You might need to find like perhaps a more reasonable wake-up hour, or you could even do something indirectly. You know, you could start looking at other areas of your life which are connected to that incapacity to wake up on time. So like maybe the waking up itself is something which is too difficult, so you should do something related. For example, purity. You're really struggling with purity. So instead of just saying no more impurity, which might not be possible for you at this particular moment, like you should fight for it always, but it's going to be it's going to be a great struggle. You might not be able to stop cold turkey. You should instead maybe mortify your sense appetites. You should probably make sacrifices that cause some kind of discomfort to yourself. So you give up snacks, you give up seconds on food, you give up dessert. So you mortify like your sensible appetite. And that's going to be like indirectly counteracting this really bad area of impurity that you're struggling with.
Ted, maybe to help with this part, Brother Miguel is going to paste or copy into the group chat a link to Father Fuentes' little book on the dominant defect for those that might be looking for a particular virtue that they want to grow in and need to see what area in their life they want to grow in. This little book can help you. It's called The Particular Examination of Conscience and My Dominant Defect. So Brother Miguel is going to add that to the group chat link as a resource to help some of you.
Okay. Yeah, that would be like one of the resources that
one. Yes, we're going to share the PDF with everyone. So
this is something which is very helpful. Like the very first section talks about a particular examination of conscience, which could be a kind of plan to acquire a virtue or to overcome a vice. So yeah, Sam asked, is there like a chart of virtues and vices? And his spiritual director talked to him about virtues being a tree. I believe that your spiritual director got that from Garrigou Lagrange, Father Garrigou Lagrange, who was the professor of St. Thomas, who was a professor of St. John Paul II in the Angelicum in Rome. And in Father Garrigou Lagrange's 3 Ages of the Interior Life, I believe that is where this tree of the virtues comes up. And it is true that, or the notion of them being connected, yeah, it sort of can be outlined as a tree. There are numerous, the Summa Theologica is a wondrous example of how the virtues are all connected to each other. So he will basically, in the second part of the Summa, he lays out all these different kinds of virtues and vices based upon the 7 primary virtues. Okay, so chart, share screen. Where are you? Here you go. Share. So this is an example of like some virtues that are connected to charity. Some like are different, or derived from charity. And there are many other of this sort. Justice is a very complicated one where you can sort of see the different virtues and vices. Where are you? Virtue of. So it's, yes, there are trees that exist of that sort that you can look up. I think the 3 Ages of the Interior Life will have one for you. So Sister Faith asked, talking about the relationship between sacraments or prayer and virtue. Sacraments or prayer and virtue. Jesus is helping me in those moments. So weak. Okay. So when we are in this process of trying to develop virtues, it is something important for us to remember that this is not a purely natural battle. Like St. Paul said, we're not even capable of having good desires without the grace of God. And so there is this underlying need for grace where asking God for the particular grace, for the particular virtue you're trying to achieve is something which is always helpful. So if you're looking for the virtue of humility, for example, the litany of humility is a beautiful one to pray regularly. And for people that are serious in the spiritual life, like weekly confession should be a part of their routine as well as daily mass whenever possible. There is arguably no greater means to overcoming our defects than the sacraments. But at the same time, we have to avoid the danger of imagining, okay, I receive sacraments and Jesus does the rest. Like, no, there is a need for us to actually exert. There's a need for cooperation. It's not God does it or I do it, but rather I do it and God doing it in me. So there's this like the two of us together, me and God. He is the one who instigated this. He's the one who wants me to do it. He's the one who's strengthening me to do it. He's the one who's accompanying me along the way. And he's also the one who's going to bring it to completion. But God is there the whole way through. And that's why, yeah, sacraments and prayer are something important in this process as well. The servants of the Lord. Aristoteles said that normal people are the virtuous. So does that mean people with virtues aren't normal? So basically, are you abnormal if you don't have virtue? Well, it depends on what the definition of normal is. Like if normal you mean, are you like most people on the face of the earth, then virtuous people are very abnormal, I would say. Insofar as lots of people don't have virtue. But if we mean normal in the sense of in keeping with our human nature, then yes. Like we are made by God to behave in a particular way. And when we don't behave in this particular way, we are acting unnaturally. We are acting in a way which is abnormal. So every time you sin, really, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this, you're acting irrationally. It is irrational. It is illogical to sin. It goes against our human nature. And so, yeah, this whole notion of being normal depends upon how you hold the word, how you understand the word normal. We should take heart knowing the fact that many people are in the struggle to do what is right. Like St. Paul, I know what is right and I do what is wrong. But we were made to behave virtuously. Like that's how God created us. Awesome. Hi, Father. So Joanne Hernandez. Hi, Father. How do we not get discouraged when others don't perceive our good doing? Our virtue to treat one another with respect, love, and compassion is good. I'm referring to the social, racial environment that's happening right now. I spread love and compassion as much as I can. I do it out of love, truth, and respect. But if others, police, racists, etc., don't receive it, how do I overcome that? How can I teach that to others to continue to practice love and not get discouraged? Right, and that is one of the great temptations or one of the great fights in the practice of virtues, like love here, compassion, mercy. Those are all virtues, and it might not be so difficult for us to have, to act lovingly one time, but it will be a challenge for us to persevere in that virtuous act there. And so like the virtue of fortitude is something fundamental for all the virtues. There is this notion of if you're lacking any one of the virtues, you're going to be limited in your other virtues. So if you don't have fortitude, you're not going to be able to be prudent because you're not going to want to do the thing that is difficult unless you have that virtue of fortitude. And so your intellect is going to be modified because of your lack of capacity to do what is challenging. So anyway, fortitude is something that's going to help us to persevere in that fight, or to help us to continue to behave virtuously even when it's difficult. But in like perhaps just like a single word about like why not to get discouraged even when it seems as if our efforts aren't accomplishing much, we need to realize that we are the light of the world. God created us to be the light of the world. We were created to be a beacon set on a hill, not to be hid under a bushel. We are meant to illuminate the world with the truth of Christ, even if it is just a tiny flame. We might not be a floodlight, but if all we have is a match, let's light that match. Let us light that little bit of fire that we can, that little bit of love, that little bit of compassion, that little bit of mercy. That is what the world needs now. And with a little match, you can set a whole city on fire with the love of God. And so, yes, it might not be paying off great dividends here and now, but if all God has given you is a match, then light that match, and you are doing what you were meant to do on earth. And don't ever allow the fact that somebody comes along and blows it out to prevent you from lighting her up again. We are fulfilling our vocation, our God-given vocation in life, so long as we do what is possible to us. Because nobody, this is a principle in morality, nobody is called to do the impossible. Ad impossibiliabatur nemo tenetur. Nobody is held to the impossible. So do what we can. That's all that God asks. And so long as we're doing the will of God, that's it. So what about like when you're with somebody else who like is Like let's say you're in a relationship with somebody and they're struggling with a particular virtue or vice. Like how could you help each other out? Well, on the one hand, there's the possibility of having accountability partners. This is not just for chastity, but it's something which is commonly talked about in the area of chastity. So like, how can I help you become virtuous? Well, maybe you need to report to me, or I need to like hold you accountable for your virtuous or your lack of virtue behavior. So like, for example, certain seminarians I've actually heard, not IVE, but diocesan guys, during the summertime, they'll like have struggles getting up in the morning. So they'll have their friends call them. Like they'll say, hey, call me in the morning and we're going to do the morning prayer together, because by myself, it's really hard for me to actually get out of bed. So like that was something that just in a very practical way, they built each other up in that manner. Something else, when it comes to helping other people grow in virtue, remember, the virtue has to come from within the other person. And so if you want somebody else to develop a virtue, the best thing you can do for them is put them in a position where they can practice that virtue, or remove them from occasions where they could fall easily into the vice. Like parents with their children, educators with their students, with their pupils, spiritual directors with their directees, they need to provide environments for the practice of virtue and avoid with the other person occasions of sin. So that might be something that you could do with each other. So Emily asked, what are some specific ways to work at overcoming pride? Oh my goodness, if you want to know that, Father Fuentes has a list in here. Like just to give you guys a basic example. Material for work regarding humility and pride. So ask for the grace to grow in humility. Pray the litanies. Recall my sins. Recall all the good that God has given me. Docilely obey those who are my equals and my inferiors. Ask others to tell me what to do. Bear mockeries in silence. Go with the flow. So like laugh at yourself basically when other people laugh at you. Ask others for help and formative advice. So like there's a list here that could be very helpful for you when you're working on pride. But yeah, so it could be the recollection of your own sins, like, oh gosh, I'm not perfect, look at me. Or just remembering that, wow, everything I have and possess and I'm capable of doing is thanks be to God. Like the Blessed Virgin Mary, she was perfect, almost, basically, kind of, as much as a human being could be. No sin, basically. So she couldn't look at her sins and say, wow, I'm very imperfect because of my sin. She couldn't do that. So like, let's say you're really successful and good at what you do. Give the glory to God. You're only capable of doing what you're doing because God is giving you the power to do what you're doing. That's humbling. But there are many other things as well. Maria asked, can you talk about what are the ways to most effectively move from each phase mentioned and change the intellect, will, and emotions to advance in our growth for virtues? So this is something which there won't necessarily be this massive transition point. This is something which is gradual. It is progressive. It is something which happens more, not so much as like steps, boom, 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 but like as a gradual incline. And so it might be difficult for us to even diagnose exactly where we fall on that fourfold chart. You know, are we somebody who is intemperate? Are we somebody who is incontinent? Are we somebody who is continent? Or, you know, where exactly we are with regard to this chart. But like the fundamental rule for us to follow is repetition of acts. Like that's something we can't stress enough, that with that process, we are going to be developing these virtues. Now, it's true, when it comes to your intellectual analysis, learning your faith is going to help you in a big way there. So like studying the faith, reading the catechism, studying theological textbooks, reading the lives of the saints, reading the books written by the saints, all these things will help you with your intellect. When it comes to your will, let's say you got a really weak will, it's very helpful to read the lives of the saints. Like those are great sources of inspiration. Those are like, okay, I know what I should be doing, but it's really, I just like really don't want to miss hard. Read the saints. Like they are, yeah, they're inspiring. They were the favorite spiritual reading of St. John Marie Vianney, Lives of the Saints. When it comes to the desires, one piece of advice I can give is that find the goodness in the good act you're performing. So let's say you're waking up early. It's easy for us to list 500 reasons why I should stay in bed, but find that good thing there. Like, why is it that I am going to tell the truth now? Find the good things there. Make the list of the goodness of being honest at all times. Or like, why should I give this back to this guy? Why should I be fair with him? Why should I be just with him? Why should I do restitution? There are good reasons. Find them. That will help your emotions. Axel asked, how do you recommend someone who is incontinent to grow in virtue, especially in this current society where it seems like it's becoming harder and harder to do the right thing because the wrong is being normalized? Right, and I presume when you say incontinent here, you are meaning, you're referring to the sphere of temperance. That's where it normally is used. It could refer to other, anyways, I'm gonna go on that presumption. Yeah, when it comes to incontinence in our present day and age, one thing that could be of help would be to recall or to like make connections, like between that sexual drive, which so often is like present, and other activities we perform. I'm not like a neurologist or anything, but like there's an understanding of how the, when you are tempted by some kind of incontinent activity, whether it be eating too much, having sex, or drinking too much, or even playing video games, all of these activities, all these things that bring pleasure to you are preceded by this shot of dopamine in your brain. Like there is this common chemical which is released in moments of pleasure. And so when you're playing video games or you're watching some sort of sensually stimulating movie, you know, not even going into the area of pornography, we're talking about just like, maybe like, yeah, movies or action shows or YouTube videos, just things that are like that get you wired. Every time you eat food, you get this shot of dopamine. And so when you counteract, when you cut down on these other areas in your life where you get these shots of dopamine, you're going to see yourself more capable of controlling yourself in that really serious area of your life, which is the area of chastity. So practice self-control in other areas of your life and you'll have more strength in the area of chastity. Seamus asked, what do you think is a good way to overcome laziness? This is one vice that is quite troublesome. Yeah, it is a common issue that we face. One of the things that would be helpful would be to begin to make a kind of a schedule for your own life. So you could do that. Make basically like a plan of life, like, okay, every day or like 3 days a week, I'm going to exercise. These days of the week, I'm going to read for 40 minutes. These days, I'm going to be going to daily mass. These days, I'm going to pray the rosary at this time. So you could like develop a routine, a schedule, you know, like a sort of disciplinary measure and implement it into your life, you know, realistic goals that you would accomplish on a daily basis. But if you're looking for just one single thing that you could do, getting out of bed in the morning, like literally, that would be a huge difference for the rest of your day. You know, if you start off on the wrong foot, it's really easy to keep going the wrong way the rest of the day. It's like the foundation of a building. If your building starts out tilted, the rest of the whole building is going to be tilted. The foundation is tilted, the rest of the building is going to be tilted. But if you start off on the right footing, if you start off with that act of the will and you're like driven and you're like, okay, I'm getting out, we're done with it, I'm out of bed. That same act you performed at the very beginning of the day is going to be easy to repeat. It's going to be easier to repeat throughout the day. But if you're lazy from the get-go, it's going to be easy to be lazy throughout the day.
Father Ted, thank you so much for joining us today, for the wonderful talk on virtue, and for taking all of those questions. We really appreciate it. So everyone, let's give a round of applause, although he won't hear it. You know, yeah. Thank you, Father Ted. Good work. Okay, everyone. So we are excited that you're having so many of you join us today. We had 94 people, I think, as our max number today. So a great audience. Want to let you know about tomorrow's talk. So Mother Faith will be joining us from Mankato, Minnesota, and she will be speaking on holiness, on our vocation, and how we can begin to start directing our lives to that great end. But before we close out today, I just want to remind you that you have until Friday if you want to order the t-shirt that we're offering for this event. Even though we're not together, we can still try to get the t-shirt from the event. You can simply go to the link that's found on the Universitas 20 website. It's actually coming through a company out of Brooklyn, so